Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again to a video where we are of course going to be talking about GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64, a game of almost biblical holiness to an awful lot of people, and as a result of that, I find revisiting it for the purpose of this review actually quite daunting. I've covered many Bond games on this channel, but GoldenEye N64 is without a doubt an entity all unto itself. This is not a mere movie tie-in. This is a defining piece of work that, regardless of whether I end this review a fundamentalist or an atheist on it, this game affected how video games were made as an industry. So much has been written and analysed about this game. There are important historical events that have less online and print coverage than GoldenEye for the N64, and if you're interested in knowing more about this game from a technical or a hardcore gamer perspective, I mean, pretty much every single asset created for this game has some article explaining it in detail somewhere online. For the purpose of this review, just like every other Bond game I've covered on this channel, I will be looking at it from the perspective of a die-hard Bond fan, as opposed to a die-hard gamer. GoldenEye is a game that will go down in history as one of the most influential elements of its kind, and all the revelations and influences it brought about are indisputable. However, what I will be looking at in this video is its place in the Bond universe. Is it worth seeking this out to play today? Does it still hold up when compared to those adolescent memories a good deal of us hold so dear? Or for Bond fans, are there actually more Bondian games out there that would be more worth the effort of figuring out how the hell you connect these old consoles to a modern TV these days to play? This and more will be explored as we go level by level through GoldenEye 007 for the N64. And just a quick shout out up front as well, that if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please do consider scrolling below and clicking the subscribe button to stay up to date on future Bond-related uploads that I make on this channel. Also below you can find links to my social media pages, so I'm very active on Twitter these days, so if you're on there as well, do consider heading over there and giving me a follow. There's also my Facebook page, as well as my Patreon page, for those of you who really like this channel and want to go one extra step in supporting it. You can head over for more details on that site. But all that being said, let's get on with the game. Loading up the game immediately prompts a rather cute game classification card, which is a fun way of getting the copyright info and the like out of the way, while also evoking, obviously, the BBFC classification cards you get at the front of movies in the cinema in the UK. And then, just as if you were starting up a Bond film, we get a couple of logos and then a blaring Bond theme cues and a blocky likeness of Pierce Brosnan recreating the gun barrel sequence from the films, and we even get a credit sequence of sorts introducing the various characters of the game. Not the names of the corresponding actors' likenesses though, just like the character names, which is interesting, and it certainly feels more like a sitcom opening than a Bond movie opening though. There are no silhouettes of naked women or the like. It feels very sitcom-y in that way. I would kind of love it though if Bond films did open this way. Oh, I've seen this one. Anyway, onto the game itself. It gives you the option of 4 save files in the form of several dossiers, which is a nice touch, and selecting a fresh one will lead you into the first level of the game, Damn, a level that begins with a somewhat iconic camera sweep before settling in just behind James Bond and placing the player firmly in first-person mode. The level's narrative seems to be largely centered around some of the material that was actually deleted from the film that leads up to the iconic Damn bungee jump, as text briefings from M tell you to make your way through an assortment of guards to reach the Damn where you can bungee jump into the weapons factory, with the goal of destroying the chemical weapons being developed there. A short scene-setting clip informs the player that this level takes place 9 years ago, so just like in the movie. Something that might be confusing to first-time players is that depending on which of the 3 difficulty settings you choose from, the objectives of the mission actually change. The easiest of the modes asks you just to bungee jump from the platform, but the hardest asks you to neutralize alarms, install a modem, and incept data as well as that. This is something of a lost feature from a lot of Bond games that came after GoldenEye, and I can see why. I mean, if you're developing a game, why would you insert all of these objectives when only a fraction of the players will actually do them? But it does allow for a lot of flexibility regarding how you choose to spend your time playing the game, which I really like. Sometimes I would just pick this up and go for the easiest of difficulty settings and just kind of blast my way through for 20 minutes, or sometimes if I wanted a more intricate experience, I would go for the harder difficulty settings and play through that way. I really like the level of individuality depending on what you want from the experience right off the bat. However, it does mean that some of the text briefings become a bit redundant. If your only objective is to jump off the dam, then Q's ramblings about satellite links and backups might be a tad confusing. So, the gameplay itself, given how awkwardly designed the N64 controller was, I was nervous that I'd have trouble slipping back into this since it's been years since I last played this game, but surprisingly the controls were very easy to pick up. I do love how the N64 controller was built with this trigger button around the back. It's a very cool feature for shooting games like this, to really feel like you're pulling a trigger when you shoot. It's quite cool. I also love how the various controller settings are named after Bond girls. It's a nice Bondian touch. The level is a relatively simple one format-wise. To ease you into the game, it's very linear. You're essentially following a truck through the environment, killing goons along the way, and occasionally pausing to take care of objectives otherwise, depending on the difficulty setting. I will say, just on that subject, that I equally like and dislike how figuring out how to accomplish some of the objectives in this game can be quite vague, actually. Installing the modem, for example, in this level, like, what that means is to go into your inventory, find the modem, and then fire it at this screen on a wall. I played this game to death when I was a kid, so I remembered how to do it, but if you were coming into this fresh, there isn't much to suggest that this relatively inauspicious piece of level design is imperative to completing an objective. However, maybe I kind of dig that vagueness. It prompts a lot of exploration and experimentation, which is cool. Playing GoldenEye never feels like an on-rails experience, which is interesting considering that the game was initially being developed early on as an on-rails shoot-'em-up. But it can feel a little bit jarring if you're used to more modern games like today, where you have icons telling you where to go and objects flash and that kind of stuff to signify their importance. There isn't really any of that here in GoldenEye for the N64. I'll talk about this a bit more going into the next level though, as taking a leap of faith off the dam's platform prompts a cutscene that ends the level and gives you some stats, including where on an enemy's body you actually hit them, which is pretty cool. Anyway, on to the next level, the legendary facility level. My favourite level as a kid, and one that I played over and over and over again. It, of course, begins just like in the film, with Bond entering the facility via the toilets and then heading off to rendezvous with 006. For someone like myself, who knows the movie GoldenEye better than I do actual family members, the attention to detail with the level design is fantastic here at the very start of the level. Everything is laid out just like what we see in those first few shots of the film. Indeed, some of the game's designers did actually have the opportunity to visit the film set and take copious amounts of pictures for research, and they translated those sets to the game incredibly well. But much artistic license is taken with the rest of the level, including an entire submission where the player must find an ally at the facility named Dr. Doak to receive the decoder to open the bottling room door later on. Dr. Doak is obviously named after and shares the likeness of David Doak, who worked on the game's development and has since become a very well-known character amongst gamers. Everyone knows who you're talking about when you refer to Dr. Doak in the gaming community, which is really cool. To talk a little bit more about the mechanics, like I said at the start of this, I'm far from being a hardcore gamer, so I can't go into the technical side of things, but I'm hard-pressed to think of a first-person shooter where just the very basic requirement of, well, shooting enemies is as fun as it is in this game. There's something intrinsically satisfying, whether it's the trigger controller or how enemies respond to shots in different parts of their bodies, or whether, unlike most modern shooters, you can actually carry as many weapons as you'd like and ammo is in abundance. I don't know, I just know that I've never played a game where getting a headshot is even half as satisfying as it is in this game. Meeting up with 006, Alec Trevelyan of course, in the bottling room prompts some dialogue from the film, and all that's left to do is plant some mines and wait for just the right moment after Oromov shoots Alec to set them off and escape. Again, this is something that I think you only really know how to do after multiple cases of trial and error. Setting the mines off too early can fail the mission, as can accidentally killing Alec, even though technically, seeing as Alec goes on to be the main villain of the game, you'd think that killing him here would actually just beat the game. Like, once he's dead, just roll the credits and we're done. Another thing that I just love about this game, actually, on the subject of failing missions, is that even if you fail an objective, you're not just kicked out of the level, but you can continue to explore the environments and play through other objectives, even though you won't be passing on to the next level overall. There's even some wiggle room with some objectives, like not harming the scientists, for example. In other games, that normally means something along the lines of, well, if you kill an innocent bystander, you fail the mission immediately. Here, you can actually get away with killing one or two and still pass the mission mission, and I guess that this is somewhat inspired by the fact that Alec in the film actually kills a presumably unarmed scientist, and again, if that's the case, then that level of detail harkening back to the movie is really appreciated. Ending the level, you can either leave via a conveyor belt like in the film, or you can just run out the door into the final section of Mission 1. Runway. Like most missions in the game, this can be as long or short as you'd like it to be. Finding the ignition key for the plane and charging to it takes no time at all really, but a little exploration leads you to a parked tank which you can hop in, and that firepower comes in handy for destroying the fixed gun emplacements. Obviously this is a complete detour from the film, but the fact that it's rewarding exploration and the fact that your playthrough can be vastly different any number of times that you play it is all really great stuff. Getting to the plane and flying out of the area finishes the level, and wraps up the first 3 levels of the game, which consist of Mission 1 as it's defined, so it's on to Part 1 of Mission 2 next, Surface, and despite playing it fairly close to the narrative of the film so far, things take a massive detour here. So, as the dossiers at the start state, Bond is being dispatched to Severnaya in Russia to investigate what's going on at an old observatory complex, as there's been a lot of unusual activity around there recently. There's mention made that Orumov has been made the new head of Russia's space division, and maybe this has something to do with him, but otherwise, from a story perspective, this has nothing much to do with the previous mission, but it does still take place in the past still, as the opening shots indicate. I think this is really cool, that we're essentially getting a story which is building on what we know from the film, which obviously goes straight from the 9 years ago opening title sequence to the then present day 1995. Here, it poses the question of, well, what if Bond had more to do in this whole thing, and we can play with the timeline more, which apparently comes down to M just dispatching Bond on a bit of a busybody mission here. There's just some vague indication of, well, something might be going on, maybe, we don't know, but go look, will ya? Surface is quite a vast level, particularly for the time, and it's an easy one to get lost in. The level only loads to a certain distance before the trademark N64 fog kicks in, and as a result it can be a bit hard keeping your bearings, and so many of the little huts you have to occasionally enter to find things in are relatively indistinguishable, so I always end up getting lost and checking the same cabin twice or more, but eventually you have the opportunity to stumble upon a grenade launcher, and explosives in this game are just so much fun. Every time you have the opportunity to use a mine or a rocket launcher or the like, it's a good time. Main objectives here include powering down the dish, retrieving the bunker plans, and entering the bunker using stealthy methods, and doing all that leads you into the second part of the mission in the bunker itself. So obviously this is a huge detour from the film's narrative, as Bond never sets foot in this location in that, but here he's tasked with investigating the facility to find out what's going on, taking some pictures, and even making a copy of the GoldenEye key and leaving the original behind. Wait, copy? You mean there might be counterfeits out there and the guy in the market stall was lying when he said that this was the genuine article? I'm never shopping at Dodgy McDodgerson's market stall again. This is one of my favourite levels of the game, particularly when you get to move around the main room and there are plenty of design flourishes that remind you of the film. I also like the variety of gameplay options that are just kind of naturally built into the mechanics. I've said before on these game reviews plenty of times that I'm not a huge fan of stealth-based levels, and I'm immediately annoyed if a game's level revolves around not being seen or not raising the alarm, and then if you do, it's mission over. Here, though, you have the option of taking a more stealthy approach. If that's your thing, you can monitor guards' walk cycles, you can disable the cameras and only take out enemies with a single silenced headshot, or you can go in all guns blazing and just enjoy the onslaught. But the options are there for both, and on most levels as well, really. If you can figure out a way to be sneaky or going covertly, which is almost a necessary requirement for the hardest of difficulty settings, then go for it, or if you want to just enjoy the onslaught, go for that. What's fun about this level in particular for fans of the film is that Boris is here and involved in completing one of the objectives. Here he's just known as Programmer, but he gets to type in a CD password, and it's a fun cameo, and you can actually kill him as well if it takes your fancy. Again, feel like along with killing Trevelyan earlier on in the game, the story might have actually been over a lot quicker if this were just allowed to stand, but the Programmer will indeed appear later on in another level. After that, it's on to Mission 3, which consists of a single level silo, another one of my favourites, and I think that this game really succeeds and is at its most fun for me personally when it just gives you a linear level to blast your way through, and that's precisely what Silo does. The story is, again, very far from what we get in GoldenEye, and we're still apparently in the past at this point. The time frame for this story is kind of all over the place, but it does expand more on what was in the film, and in this mission, you're infiltrating a base where the GoldenEye satellite itself is being held. You need to photograph it as part of the mission's main priorities. Like I say, the design of this level is super linear, and it's pretty much a cut-and-paste job in terms of layout. You pretty much just go through the same sequence of corridors and rooms with some different assets, but it's really fun all the same, and it's cool seeing the GoldenEye satellite itself. Though here we're in another position where Bond could have averted the very bad things to come by just destroying the satellite here and now, and honestly, the amount of things that Bond could have done so far that would have ended the mission, it's enough to keep anyone awake at night. I should really have destroyed that GoldenEye satellite there and then. In that last mission, if I'd have just taken the original GoldenEye key with me instead of making a replica of it and leaving the real one there, that would have prevented a lot of bad things from happening. If only I'd just shot that programmer. If I'd have just killed Alec in the first place, none of this would have happened. Whatever. I'm really digging these detours from the narrative of the film, though, and while they may not make much sense from a plot perspective, I do like that they're expanding on elements that are in the film's story, and we're seeing a bit more of the universe and the backstory as a result, even if it does make no sense at all that Bond would be in these places, doing these things. Story is obviously not the main driver of fun here. It's a game, it should be about the gameplay, and indeed, the gameplay itself is an awful lot of fun. It's straight into Mission 4 next with Frigate, as we move back to something resembling what's actually in the film GoldenEye. A demonstration of a new stealth helicopter is taking place in Monte Carlo. Bond needs to get aboard and place a tracker on the helicopter, and then there are also some hostages around this level who need to be freed to give the level a bit more action. So here we're caught up to present day, apparently, and from this point on there won't be any leaps back in the timeline. So in the film, Bond is on this ship for all of a few seconds before he's captured, and I think that this is a really good way of expanding on a moment from the film and making an entire level out of it. There are hostages and bombs to be defused and everything, as well as tracking the helicopter being the main objective. I don't know why MI6 are insisting on just tracking the helicopter when Bond gets to it and it's just like, it's right there. I mean, if you know it's going to be hijacked, why not fly it out of here or guard it until more forces arrive or something? Oh, drat. This has never been a favourite level of mine, and I think it's because of the geography of the place. Once I get into the corridors and rooms, it's like being in a maze, and maybe this was the idea, but I just find myself sort of coming back through rooms I've already saved people in, and it just becomes a bit annoying. I wish there'd been some colour coding or something more obvious to let you have some kind of gauge of where you were in the ship's layout. But saying that, maybe people think that about the levels that I really love in this game, and know like the back of my hand, and I'm sure some people could probably do this level blindfolded like I could do Facility blindfolded. So, you know, who am I to complain? Maybe I just didn't spend enough time playing this level as a kid. Small thing, but I love the little animation on Bond after you complete the mission. Him adjusting his tie and doing his cuffs is really nice, and without proper cutscenes or voice acting or the like, it can be hard to try and make something like this feel like a specifically Bondian property, but just these nice little details do a lot to help achieve that, I think. Next up is Mission 5, divided into 2 levels, revisiting the surface and bunker environments from earlier, which have both been updated in a few ways to accommodate the fact that several years have passed since Bond was last there. The stolen helicopter was traced back to this location, so Bond is of course sent to investigate. Surface, I still have some issues with. It's really easy to lose your bearings on this level. I never played these levels much when I was a kid, so I don't know the routes like the back of my hand like I do Facility, like I said about the previous level, so I spend a good deal of time just kind of staggering around, feeling a little bit like a disoriented Daniel Craig from Casino Royale. Part 1 ends with Bond being apprehended upon gaining entry into the bunker in the sassiest way imaginable. Look at him folding his arms as if he's the one with the upper hand in this situation. Mate, you've just been captured. I love how, despite being detained and incarcerated, Bond still receives his MI6 briefing at the start of the level, including a particularly pissed off and uncompassionate message from M. As soon as you get back, if you get back, you're getting a performance review? Just a quick sidebar about the voices of these characters as written. Obviously, these mission briefings would evolve as the Bond games evolved, to include voice actors and then full-on cutscenes, and they'd go on to portray M, Q, and Moneypenny as closely as possible to the film versions, even if they didn't have one of the movie's actors on hand to do the voice, or even their exact likeness. For the text briefings here, Moneypenny is suitably sassy and witty, occasionally leaning into outright filth, doing a spot of Spelunking? Well, don't mess your trousers up, James. Christ, Moneypenny! But the end briefings do not read to me like they would come from the mouth of Judi Dench. Just be certain to knock out the heavy gun emplacements and missile battery, or they'll swat you out of the air like a silly fly. And Q reads much more like Never Say Never Again's Q than Desmond Llewellyn. For some reason, I just can't imagine the Q of the movie getting as horny for Xenia Onatopp as the one in the game. It's a minor quibble, no doubt about it, and I'm certainly not suggesting that these briefings should sound like they were, you know, ripped from the pages of one of the screenplays, but it's a very small thing that just kind of holds this back from feeling like it's well and truly ingrained in the Pierce Brosnan Bond universe as it was at that time. Anyway, this level is mainly about escaping the bunker, that's the primary objective, but it's also mainly notable for introducing the true arch-villain of GoldenEye 007 for the N64.
Natalia.
It's a fairly common observation that Natalia causes more trouble for Bond than any number of John Glenn's ill-timed pigeons, and indeed, obviously her constant getting in the way and ridiculously timed interventions are the stuff of legend. Her reputation precedes her. This lady is a death wish. Obviously, a good deal of the reasoning for this is that, well, video game AI was just not as sophisticated at the time that this game was made, and that's perfectly reasonable and understandable, and whilst I kind of love to poke fun at this, I mean, it's a meme, it's a trope, it's always been fun sharing war stories with like-minded gamers about, you know, the moment when Natalia ruined your perfect shot, or you failed a mission because of her and all that kind of stuff, but honestly, I didn't find it as intrusive as I thought I would as I kind of built it up in my mind. It really doesn't factor into being much of a problem for a vast majority of the game. From a story perspective, big detour from the film here as Bond and Natalia meet at Cervanaya, a place that Bond does of course not travel to in the film, but it's as good a spot as any for Natalia to exposit a bit about how she ended up locked down here because she witnessed Orumov stealing the GoldenEye, and now her and Bond are to be shot, but Bond fortunately has a cunning plan to get them out.
I have a cunning plan to solve the problem.
This basically amounts to using the magnetic watch to get the cell key and or a bizarrely placed throwing knife to attack the lonesome guard and escape. The rest of the level is a friggin' onslaught. Keeping Natalia locked up while you go about achieving other goals is a must, as once things kick off here, they do so in a massive way, with goons respawning by what feels like the dozen. I actually feel like this is one of the harder levels in the game, even on one of the easier difficulty settings. It is brutal, but nonetheless, completing the level and leaving the base ends the thing, and from there, I guess it's a long walk for Bond to St. Petersburg, where the next level takes place at the Statue Park. The preamble explains that at some point in between levels, Natalia has been abducted by the Yanis Syndicate, and given how she was in the previous level, maybe it's not a bad thing to not have her tagging along for this one. Here you are charged with making it into the Statue Park to meet with a Valentin Zukovsky, who stands as one of the better representations of the movie actor being transferred to a video game character. I think that Robbie Coltrane's face looks pretty good on this blocky character. And you know, it's nice to have Zukovsky in the game, really, when, I don't know if he needed to be. I mean, he's basically here to tell you, like, oh, you're here, James, but you need to go to this other place in the level to actually meet with Yanis. But before we get to that, I do want to say that I really love how this level is designed, and it evokes a lot of really great imagery from the film, and it's just a really cool location to explore. It's a place we don't see a whole lot of in the film, so it's another one of those cases where I just really appreciate that here we have this big open area, and it's a damn sight easier to track where you are, unlike Surface, thanks to the variations in the statues and such. I find keeping my bearings much easier here. So the level builds up to a meeting with Yanis by the statue of Lenin, and while you may not have been able to tell back in the day thanks to a small low-res display, Yanis here is indeed your old mate Alec from the facility level earlier on in the game, whose motivation, much like the Alec of the film, is about getting revenge for the deaths of his parents at the hands of the British government. After a brief exchange, Trevelyan runs off and Bond must go and save Natalia before the Tiger helicopter self-destructs, and by save, I of course just mean like find her lying on the floor like she's just been thrown out of a club for overdoing it on the Moscow Mules and telling her to get off her ass and run. The level ends with Defense Minister Mishkin arresting the pair and taking them away for questioning, the next two levels being an all-out action fun recreating the archives action and tank chase goodness from the film. These are some of the absolute highlights of the entire game. It's so much fun blasting around these environments, and the relatively non-linear nature of them is quite appealing to someone like me with, you know, there are multiple ways of going about things, different different routes to take and so on. It's tremendous fun. There is more Natalia-related hilarity too in Archives. If she's subjected to too much weapon usage, she runs off somewhere else to like hide in the level, meaning that you have to slog back and forth trying to find where she's bloody well run off to. I wouldn't mind so much, but the end of the level cutscene has her looking all badass like, yeah, I totally wasn't cowering in the attic 2 minutes ago. I'm so ready for this. Toss me a gun and oh wait, I've been captured again.
Well, my work is done here.
What do you mean your work is done? You didn't do anything.
Didn't I?
Like, seriously? How did this even happen? The following level takes place, like, literally seconds after Archives ends, but whatever, at least it gets Natalia out of your hair for a bit longer, and this level has a friggin' tank in it, so whatever story. This level is seriously so much fun, though. Valentine pops up again, you can mow down guards in the tank, MI6 seem to turn a blind eye to you taking out a couple of civilians if they get in your way, and there are multiple options of how to play, so that leads to plenty of replay value, lovely stuff. The next level is Depot, though, and it's never been a favourite of mine. It's a lot of, like, shipping containers in a fairly nebulous environment that I find quite dull. The only main story-centric mission here is really to find Trevelyan's train, and there is, of course, more side stuff to do depending on the difficulty setting that you selected, but this has really never been a level that I played all that much, unlike the train level, which was always one of my absolute favourites. It's a very straight-down-the-line, moving in one direction kind of level. There's really no option for radically different playthrough if you do it multiple times, but I've always found this to be such a rollicking good time. For all of my comments earlier on about enjoying non-linear levels, this is about as linear as you can get, and it's just phenomenally good fun. Obviously things climax with a hostage situation in which Bond kills Orumov, and if you're in just the right position and manage to get a hit in on Xenia 2, it can buy Natalia some extra hacking time to discover the villainous pair are heading to Cuba, which is of course where the heroes head to after the train explodes behind them. Using the laser watch to escape the train has long been a favourite moment of mine in the game. It feels properly Bondian, and the laser watch is my favourite Bond gadget, so I love having the ability to use it in this game, and the ticking clock aspect provides some good tension. There are even a couple of guards thrown in at the end to trigger your post-traumatic Natalia getting in the way syndrome. The final 4 levels of the game form Mission 7, which moves the action to Cuba, where we have some background notes before the jungle level begins. Love the detail that Jack Wade has apparently given Natalia some firearms training to explain why she can suddenly semi-fend for herself. Jack Wade is probably the only prominent character from the movie not to appear physically in the game, outside of the MI6 bunch, of course, but then, given how 007 Racing mangled Joe Don Baker's likeness for that game, maybe it's a blessing that they didn't try to represent him here? Sometimes I lay awake at night, fearful of falling asleep, fearful of even closing my eyes in case I see that haunted face staring back at me in my nightmares. Anyway, jungle level's pretty cool. There's very little music, but plenty of ambient noise to create a relatively tense environment, and a location that is very different from a lot of the other locations in the game. There's a boss battle with Xenia that I remembered being the most unbeatably difficult thing in the game when I was a kid, and I was kind of dreading how intense this was going to be this time, but it turns out she dies kind of easily, actually. Killing her bags you the RCP-90, though, which is, for my money, the best gun in the game, and also gets extra points for sounding like the name of a Star Wars droid. Hello, Master Bond. I am RCP-90, and proficient in over 6 million forms of killing everything. Up next is Control Center, which is of course based on the scenes from the film where Bond and Natalia infiltrate Alec's base. Toppest of top marks with a fabulous elevator muzak that begins the level. I could stay in this lift all day. This is a really tough level. There are plenty of bad guys, objectives, Natalia needs protecting for a good chunk of it as she attempts to disable the GoldenEye satellite, but it has remained one of my favourites, due in part to the very accurate level design when compared to the sets from the film. I love how accurately they were able to reproduce the main hub of Trevelyan's base, and I also love that Boris makes an appearance here and gets to say his "I am invincible" line before running off and, vanishing? I am invisible.
I'm going for a cigarette.
It's a really nice touch that the character makes an appearance in this location. Dropping his gun is a nice touch too, and he does technically survive the events of the game though, or at least we don't see him perish, but it is always fun to chase after him when he runs off to just see him evaporate into thin air. Funny thing is, if you don't just let him run off and you actually kill him, Natalia gets really pissed off with you and refuses to help you complete the mission, and then she just runs off. It's an interesting little detail, and given that keeping Boris alive isn't really a necessary plot point for the rest of the game, it's kind of this strange but nice character moment for Natalia. Completing the level takes you to Water Caverns, which is pretty much a straight down the line run and gun level as you chase Trevelyan through the caverns beneath his base. Another great location expanding on what's in the film. The pumps which allow the base to be concealed by water are located here, and depending on the difficulty setting, destroying those controls is a factor in the mission. This is a tricky level, with plenty of scientists hanging around to get in your way and make things difficult. The most annoying part of the level, for me, was always this bit, where the scientists are mixing in with guards in front of a bunch of explosives and necessary mission tech, so if you're not careful, you can set them all off and fail the mission completely. Also, a frustrating feature of the last few levels are the fixed machine gun placements. These are so frustrating to deal with. They fire with such accuracy, and because whenever you get hit by a weapon in the game, you kind of get pushed back and disoriented, there's like a flash, and so you always need to kind of slightly hide behind a corner to aim at them from behind some cover, and getting the angle just right is a bit annoying with the controls being what they are, but that aside, I've always really liked the level, and it's a pure adrenaline action level, and I love it on that basis. Next up is Cradle, the final level of the story mode, and a suitably action-packed showdown with Trevelyan. Again, love how faithfully the location from the film has been represented in the game here. I just so wish that the graphical capabilities of the time could have allowed you to see some of the environment around and below all these walkways. But whatever, it is a fun final boss level, chasing Trevelyan around the place and eventually coming to a showdown on a small platform, which I have definitely been known to fall to my death a fair few times from. But getting a shot in on Trevelyan causes him to fall into the blue abyss below as Natalia arrives with a helicopter to take Bond to safety, prompting the final cutscene/credits over an impossibly long smooch between the two heroes. I mean, seriously guys, come up for air? And thus ends the main single-player campaign for GoldenEye 007, but the fun hardly ends there. There are 2 bonus levels for a start. Aztec is unlocked by completing the game on Secret Agent difficulty, and for a Moonraker geek like myself, this is something really special. It recreates so much of Drax's Aztec base from that film and expands on it, and you're a tuxedo-clad Bond going around finding shuttle launch codes and stuff, and they build that really cool control room that Drax has from the film, and Jaws is here as well for a little boss fight, and they redo that bit from the film where Bond is beneath one of the shuttle exhausts and you need to escape just before the thing goes off. This is absolutely terrific. I adore this level, and just the fact that they sought to include it at all, it's such a fantastic treat for Bond fans and a really great reward for putting in the time and effort to complete the game on a harder difficulty, a real incentive to better your own game, and for God's sake, they put the damn Moonraker laser in the game, and the design is just fantastic. I get my beautiful blue laser, I see the Drax Industries logo, I adore that this is here. It definitely didn't need to be here, but geez, I'm so glad it is. I'm so glad that the makers of this game went this extra step. It's phenomenal. After that level, the next unlockable is Egyptian, which you get by completing all previous levels on 00 Agent difficulty, which is something that I have never been able to do. Yeah, so hands up, I only got as far as the control level on 00 Agent difficulty back in the day, because this was in a day where difficulty in video games actually really meant something. I did try to just jump back in this time, but GoldenEye is really a game that you need to know to, like, the pixel to successfully complete, and, you know, I've said it before, I've said it in this review, I'm not a hardcore gamer by any stretch, and I have to admit that I couldn't do it then and I couldn't do it now. However, at a point in time, I have indeed played this level. A school friend of mine's brother unlocked the level on his game cartridge, and we'd take it in turns trying to play it until one of us eventually completed it, so we could ask 10-year-old Calvin what he thinks of it if we had the ability to do so. Fortunately, just for this occasion, I've been able to rig my GoldenEye device with time travel capabilities, so we can actually go back in time for a short period and ask 10-year-old Calvin what he thinks of this level. Stay with me, people. Okay, so I'm gonna press the button, and then we're gonna go back in time. Here goes, folks. Oh boy, it actually worked! It's funny how my friend's house in 1999 looks exactly like my flat in 2020. Oh wow, Calvin!
Yes? Who are you?
Well, I'm you, from the future.
Oh?
Yeah, I run a YouTube channel all about James Bond, and I'm making a video about GoldenEye for the N64.
Ah. What's YouTube?
It doesn't matter, but could you tell everyone what the Egyptian level is like?
Oh, all right. Yeah, sure. Well,
the whole thing is sort of a sequel to Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. Baron Samedi sent a message to MI6 claiming that he has hold of the golden gun and you have to go and get it. There's a puzzle involving the floor tiles to get to the golden gun, and you end up killing Baron Samedi multiple times throughout the level, and the whole thing ends with Bond walking away, but Samedi is still alive. It's quite an ominous end to the game, really, all things considered.
and that's it, really. It's not the best of levels, but Baron Samedi's in it, and he's pretty cool.
Huh, well that was all pretty interesting. Thanks, child Calvin.
No problem. What time did you come from, anyway?
2020.
Wow! By that point, you must be up to nearly 30 Bond films.
Yeah, sure.
And given the trajectory of scientific advancements as well as a steadily more educated populace, you must be living in some kind of new world utopia in 2020, the kind that we in 1999 can only dream of.
This thing's broken or something. I think I'll just wait outside, but thanks, child Calvin. See you later.
Goodbye. Nice to know I waste my future.
And even those bonus levels are not where the fun ends. There are unlockable cheats as well, and really good ones, ranging from a paintball mode to invincibility to DK mode, which gives all of the characters these massive heads and arms like Nintendo's Donkey Kong. These cheats are excellent for replay value and a great excuse to explore more of the levels when you're not worrying about being shot in the back, or you don't have to worry about not having the right equipment to get somewhere. You can just stick on no damage and all guns and go exploring, uncover new things. Heck, even do a test run on a certain difficulty setting before going back and completing it properly. There's such a freedom that permeates GoldenEye that is so addictive. It's hardly an open world adventure game, and despite that, each level does feel like something of a sandbox that you can just kind of play around in, examine, spend as much or as little time in each area as you want. It's all very unvain in that regard. And of course, we have to come to the multiplayer. I cannot tell you how many hours I spent with friends on this thing. I mean, it's countless. There are undoubtedly millions of people around the planet that have the exact same exclamations of absolute nostalgic joy for this thing. Like, you know, taking the mickey out of the friend who chooses to play as Odd Job because the character's so much shorter than all of the others and it's kind of cheating, and then, you know, everyone rushing to select Bond because everyone wants to be Bond because he's the coolest, and playing about with the modes and the cheats and the franticness, like, whenever you get a prolonged shootout is just, I mean, I can't express enough how many great memories I have of this multiplayer. For recording footage for this playthrough, though, I don't have 4 N64 controllers anymore, and I was by myself, so it's been a long time since I had a true 4-player deathmatch on this thing. Last time was probably when I was at university in like 2010 or so, and for the record, I would always pick Xenia as my character, and the Golden Gun mode was my favourite. There was just one golden gun that would be dropped into the map, and this would lead to you making allegiances with your friends to gang up on the one player who had the gun and stuff. I love those memories of GoldenEye's multiplayer, and I'll always have a very special place in my heart for providing those. And indeed, if I'm to wrap up how I feel about GoldenEye 007 for the Nintendo 64, how can my feelings for it not be entirely wrapped up and entrenched and soaked in those nostalgic memories I have of playing this game with my friends when I was a kid? As far as creating an experience where the player is made to feel like they are James Bond, the game just succeeds. I mean, there are gadgets, cool weapons, a lot recognizable from the films themselves, there's plenty of fun to be had with the Bond conventions, and it's undoubtable that the people making this game did a great deal of research, and were probably a lot of Bond fans themselves, and the attention to detail and just fun little nods and references here and there are absolutely lovely for a big Bond geek like myself. I particularly love how the story of the game expands on what we have in the film, and it does it in what feels like a very natural way. Most of the sidebars do actually make quite a bit of sense and really enrich the GoldenEye world and mythology. I think the technical limitations of the time kind of hold this back from making me feel like I'm actually playing through a Bond film, and I think that later games like Nightfire and Bloodstone achieve that element of it a lot better, in the sense of, you know, I mean, they have a song, they have a title sequence, they have proper cutscenes and a filmic 3-act structure and all that. Obviously, there wasn't a capacity for a full-blown MI6 briefing scene with a lot of voice acting and stuff for GoldenEye, and nor would anyone have been expecting that at the time. And I mean, the gameplay is so stunning, why gripe about the lack of cutscenes? There's just something so pleasing about how this game works, and I don't even know if I really have the know-how to articulate that. Just the mechanics of the shooting, the enemy animation, the weapons, the level designs, it's all a great accomplishment. I have no doubt that some would come to revisit this and maybe not have as great a time as I did. I'd be really fascinated to know what someone who doesn't have the nostalgic memories of my generation thinks of it. I mean, are there any 20-year-old Bond fans out there who've played this game in retrospect? Please do let me know in a comment below what your thoughts of the game are. And, you know, I'm torn between whether I enjoy this as purely a fun time in its own right, or whether it's the nostalgia and cozy familiarity that completely cloud any sense of objectivity I might have. Or maybe I should just stop trying to quantify my feelings about this game in such ways and just say I loved this game when I was 10 years old and playing through the main story, and again 20 years later I had a fantastic time. GoldenEye N64 is an iconic piece of art, and I truly got a lot out of revisiting it for the purpose of this video review, and quite frankly I think the Bond brand is very lucky to have an association with such an iconic and revolutionary piece of work as this game is. I don't know if by virtue of being based on a Bond film, this game was any more of a success than it would have been if, I mean, you know, if you took these gameplay mechanics and rejigged things and gave it the skin of a Die Hard game, for instance. I think the game would have been as equally as iconic. I mean, I think GoldenEye is a brand of its own now outside of the Bond films as a result of this game, and you only need to look at the various cash-ins that came afterwards as evidence of that. The legacy of this game is clear, and in the years following its release, it has achieved a legendary status. When you talk about classic games of the N64 era, heck, of video games as an entire industry, I mean, this game was the third best-selling game of its console. This game is mentioned in the same breath as, along with the likes of Mario Kart, Resident Evil, Ocarina of Time, but where it diverts from a lot of those comparable peers is that GoldenEye 007 has remained a relic of the console it was birthed on. As of writing, there have been absolutely no official HD remasters, no ports, no nothing for a current generation console, which quite frankly sucks. Now, as I say, GoldenEye as a video game brand unto itself has meant other publishers have attempted to cash in on its legacy, including obviously GoldenEye Rogue Agent, a game where you control a character with a literal golden eye, but really that game has absolutely nothing to do with the N64 classic. And then of course in 2010, GoldenEye 007 was released for the Wii, and following that there was a port for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, GoldenEye 007 Reloaded. This adhered much more closely to certain elements of the N64 version, but mostly did its own thing, and honestly it feels more like a Daniel Craig redo of the GoldenEye movie than the GoldenEye game. And beyond those instances, the game's developer, Rare, released Perfect Dark a few years later, a game which used an updated version of the same game engine, and very much feels like a spiritual successor to GoldenEye. And then some of the same team from Rare split to form Free Radical Design, a company that developed the Time Splitters series, of which Time Splitters 2 and Time Splitters Future Perfect are a couple of my absolute favourite games of all all time, and the blood of GoldenEye very much flows through those games' veins as well. Fan-made projects include GoldenEye Source, a remake of the GoldenEye multiplayer for PC, and very recently there was a project to remake the entire game, including single-player, called GoldenEye 25, which was to release in 2022, but perhaps inevitably legal issues involved in such a thing reared their heads, and the project in that form was cancelled and had to rebrand into more of a spiritual sequel in the form of Spies Don't Die. I find it endlessly frustrating that a port of this game has never been officially released, despite a few points in history where that was potentially going to be a possibility. In 2006, it came to light that Nintendo were looking into potentially bringing the game to the Wii's Virtual Console, and then in 2008 an entire remaster was being developed for the Xbox, and we can see how that game would have looked. There are actual screenshots out there, and it would have been fairly damn exciting, but sadly the legal entanglements wrap around this property like Xenia wrapping her legs around James Bond himself. See, the game was developed by Rare and originally published by Nintendo, but Microsoft bought Rare to develop games for their own consoles, and given that Nintendo and Microsoft are rivals in the home console market, an alliance, even one that I would assume would be mutually profitable, looks unlikely. But then on top of all of that is the Bond license itself, which has been passed around multiple parties over the years, and that's not to even get into the potential issues of actors' likenesses and so on. In fact, such issues regarding likenesses actually prevented Rare from implementing a feature in the original game where Sean Connery, Roger Moore, and Timothy Dalton were also present as multiplayer characters, and a 4-player, 4-Bond deathmatch would have been so awesome. I still hold out hope that someday GoldenEye will receive a release on a modern console. Heck, throw in online gameplay too, and the thing would print money like nobody's business, given how underserved, particularly we Bond video game fans have been over the last few years. The idea of jumping online and being able to play a GoldenEye deathmatch with other Bond fans around the world would be something so special, and I just hope that someday this may end up becoming a reality, even if such a thing would lead to many a controller being destroyed out of sheer frustration. But I won't hold my breath, and it's a shame because I'd love to have this game be more accessible. Right now I have to dust off my old N64 and faff around with a bunch of wires and adapters to get the thing working on a modern TV, but then it does mean that every time when I do go to that effort to get it booted up and play this game, it is something of a special moment, and even just seeing Pierce Brosnan's eyes peeking over the front of the console, I mean, just that very sight gives me a nostalgic flutter, and just thinking that those eyes have surveyed over countless hours of entertainment over nearly 25 years, and I mean, I will cherish those memories forever, and it's memories that I have because this game exists and it's so damn good. So there we go, Bond fans. I hope you have enjoyed this video review of this iconic game, and certainly outside of the movie series itself, the original Ian Fleming books, this stands as one of the most iconic things related to James Bond 007. It really is that iconic for so many people. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and just to wrap up, if you have not subscribed to this channel and you've enjoyed this video and you want to see further Bond video game reviews on this channel, then please do click the subscribe button. Also, let me know in the comments section below what your fond memories are playing this game, or particularly I'm curious to know about people who maybe came to this video game much later on. Like, it was kind of released at a perfect time for me when I was a kid, so I've got so many fond nostalgic memories attached to it as a result of that. But did any of you come to this game like, you know, maybe 10 years after it was released or something like that, and did that, do you have a vastly different, less sort of nostalgic view of it than I do? Please do let me know in the comment section below. Also, hit the like button if you've liked this video, and then there are, of course, the links to my social media pages, so my Twitter page, my Facebook page, and my Patreon page, so please do head over there if you want to support this channel further. And until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.